Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be going over some of the basic image generation features of Retro Diffusion. Nearly all of the features covered in this are available in both the full and light versions of Retro Diffusion. Of course, if you're interested in the tool and don't have it yet, you can check out the description for some links to the product page. It's a one-time payment, not a subscription. It runs locally on your own computer. I've been updating it nearly every month. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, and I really try to make it, worth your time and worth your money. So when you set up Retro Diffusion, after that's all complete, you can go to Sprite and open text to image from there, or you can go to the Help menu, Retro Diffusion Scripts, and open text to image from there. I actually have it bound to a hotkey, so I won't be navigating the menus a lot, but this is where you can find the basic image generation settings. So once I open it up here, you can see it's already got a bunch of default stuff kind of loaded into it. It should have this, generic prompt here just set up, all the settings here, and I'm just gonna leave those all the same and click OK. So this will open up a terminal window here, and that'll start loading things, and it'll also open up this little generation preview window thing here, and that'll kind of show you the image as it's being created. So now it loads up this little graphic, and it's going to start loading models and all that kind of thing, and I'll just let that run through. So there we go. That's one generation from the default prompt. Every time that you generate an image, it's going to be a little bit different unless you keep this advanced setting, the seed, locked. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So, if I hit OK again with all those default settings, it'll just start generating right away. And, we've got a new image, right? So the first thing I'm going to do, right, I'm going to change this prompt because, we want to maybe see something different. So let's do a dog in a field. Neat. That's going to generate here and just make a new image. Boom. Wow, look at that. So that setting that I changed, the prompt here, that is what you want the AI to create for you. So that's the image that you're trying to create. It should be a description of that. Now, there are a lot of different ways to describe images, but for the most part, it'll get it right. The negative here, that's what you want it to avoid. So maybe if I've got this generation and, I didn't want flowers in it, for example, I could put flowers in the negative and it would, try to avoid creating those things. These two things can be a little bit, I guess the word would be fuzzy. So it's not always going to be, exactly what you ask for, and it maybe won't always be able to avoid what you tell it to avoid, but generally it should give you what you want, and that's kind of the idea. There's a whole kind of subculture of AI image generation called prompt engineering, where people figure out the best way to ask models to do things and the best way to generate images. And that's a whole rabbit hole that I won't get into, but that is something that you can explore if you want. So this style setting here, this is just a way of saving and loading the prompts and negatives that you create. So like if I switch it to default here and I click apply, we now have that default prompt applied back to the setting. Then if I click clear, that removes everything. If I click reset, it sets it back to whatever the setting was before you opened this text to image window. I could also click the save button here, and that will ask me, hey, this prompt and the negative that I have, do I want to overwrite any of these, and what's the name of this new style setting? It's also got these random things that you can apply. So if I put random landscape here and I click apply, it's going to give me a whole randomized description from kind of a list of things that I have. It's kind of useful if you're just looking to maybe test out a new model and you want to generate some generic images, or if you just want to explore things and see how it goes. I'm going to set it back to the default here because that's just kind of a good way to show off some of these different settings that I'm going to be going through. So the width and height, that's obviously going to be the pixel width and the pixel height of the image that you're generating. So by default, it's set to 64 by 64, but I could, drop it down to 32 by 32, and now we're going to, create a smaller image. Generally, smaller images are faster, and larger images will take a longer time. So if I just keep generating images here, you can see we get some different stuff, and it's, at that lower size. You can also change these independently, they don't need to match. Generally, it's good to stick to a square aspect ratio, but depending on the content you want, it might be better. Like if you're going for, full body portraits of a character, you might want it to be taller than it is wide, or if you're going for a landscape, you might want it to be wider than it is tall, all those different things. So let's create a larger image here. You can see kind of how that works. I'm going to just expand the canvas so you can see all of that. Yeah, so there you go. Higher resolutions can create some weird looking artifacts sometimes, so just be aware of that. It's gotten pretty good in recent versions about having everything be consistent, but obviously there's still going to be some weird stuff sometimes. This is not an exact science. Yeah, like you can see here, the mountain kind of melded into the raven there a little bit, but I mean that's what running it multiple times is for. Kind of a little bit of not necessarily gambling, but some randomness going on here when you generate images. So it's always good to make more than one if you want to get something closer to perfect. So I'm going to drop the size back down just, to continue explaining how things work. So this generations setting is basically how many images you want to make at a time. So if I set this to 4, then we're going to generate now 4 64 by 64 images all at once. Batching things like this can be a little bit faster depending on hardware and other settings. So here we go. It just made all these different images. And what it did here is it stacked them across frames, and this is the default setting. And to see this little timeline, you want to go to view here and you want to find the timeline setting here and you want to turn that on. The other thing we can do is if we move over now into the image style settings tab here, we've got a bunch of settings up here, but the one that we're going to look at right now is this display setting. So we can have it save as frames, which is that default setting that spreads it across frames, or we can have it save as layers. So if I enable that and click OK, now it's going to, once it generates those images, it will spread them across the layers. Like this. So now we have those new images across different layers that we can, show and hide as we go. The other thing you can do is save images in a grid, all in one layer and one frame. So if I go ahead and click that, as it generates here, we get, obviously the preview still. And then when it outputs, it spreads everything across this grid that it creates. And this will automatically expand the canvas to fit those images if they don't normally fit. Yeah, it's a good way to look at all the different generations you create in a batch all at once. So I'm going to set generations back down to 1 and set that back to frames, and then we can take a look at some of these other settings. So the quality setting here is basically kind of how fast the image will generate, and lower quality obviously looks a little bit worse, and higher quality might look a little bit better. I find that the default setting of 5 is pretty much good enough in all circumstances. It's quick, it looks good, There's usually not a reason to go higher or lower unless, you're making a whole bunch of images and you kind of want to find one that just looks about right. Like if I set the quality to 1 here, it's going to generate really quickly, but it might not look so great. Yeah, you can see it's kind of fuzzy and just, not the best. Generally, I don't advise going below quality 3 because quality 3 tends to look pretty all right while still being relatively fast. That's mostly just for, testing things out as you go. So then underneath that, we've got this edit composition button. And what that does is it actually opens up this separate menu that lets you kind of change some things about how the image will generate and look. Now, if you're at all familiar with photo editing or color grading or anything like that, you should be able to recognize a lot of these settings. You've got the hue here, and that changes, obviously this little tint slider. It's a little hard to see with the skin I have on here, but you've got the hue, the tint, the saturation, the brightness, the contrast, and then this outline setting. So if I slide this along and I turn up the tint, you can actually see, and you get a visual preview of kind of how things will look. You can see how it changes the colors of the image there. We've also got this saturation slider to change, obviously the saturation of the image. And then this brightness slider and this contrast slider. And then the outline slider, which unfortunately doesn't have a preview, but it basically changes how thick the outlines around something will be. So in pixel art, that's something that, might be desirable or might not be. So you can either try to, expand those outlines or reduce them with that setting there. You can also check this little show markers here, and that'll just show you little dividers along there so you have a better idea of where each of those settings is placed currently. There's also this edit lighting setting, and that will change this display and give you this little orbiting light ball. And that's actually a way of kind of directing how the light in the scene will appear. So you can change the direction of it, you can change where it's coming from, you can even put it around to the back and have, your model maybe backlit. And that has some influence over image generation. It's not perfect, but it does a pretty decent job of moving the light source around, especially for things like portraits and that kind of thing. So if I just turn that off and reset things, let's try getting maybe a really green generation here. So I'm going to set the tint pretty high, and I'm actually going to turn the saturation up a little bit too. So now if I go and generate an image again, it'll load everything up, and now you can see that this image that we've made is really, really green, and that's, exactly what we put the settings to. So if I want something more purple, I can turn the tint down a little bit, and I can just get, a slightly more purple version of our little default Raven prompt here. Yeah, so there we go. That's pretty purple. So this is a great way of influencing image generation and how it looks towards different colors or different styles that you want. The cool thing about this is it actually happens in image generation. So it's not a post-processing effect like you might apply with maybe a curves filter or a hue saturation filter or something like that. It's actually influencing the image generation as it's being created. And that leads to a lot higher fidelity and different concepts being enhanced maybe by the colors or the contrast or the brightness. Like if you want to generate maybe nighttime scenes, it's a really good idea to just turn the brightness down, and that'll actually help the image generator understand, okay, I want to make everything darker, right? Because normally it's not so great with brightness. It's kind of at a default medium gray value. Just really great ways of influencing how your color is going to look and how the image is going to be generated. Moving on to the next setting here, we've got this model setting. I generally advise just keeping it on pixel art because it will automatically swap models depending on what size you're at. If you go down to something like 16 by 16, there's actually a different model that kicks in, and that's just to keep kind of that context range so its understanding is good. Like how I mentioned with larger sizes, sometimes it gets a little weird. It also does the same with smaller sizes if you don't have a model specifically trained for it. So we actually do have, that specifically trained 16 by 16 model, which by default kind of creates assets in a sort of Minecraft item style. If you want to change that, you can use this next setting down here, which is the modifiers. I'm just going to set that size back to default. So the modifiers here are basically things that get layered on top of the model setting. And what they do is allow you to change the style of the images that you're creating. You can actually see that I've got a whole bunch in here. The light version will come with fewer modifiers than the full version, but it still lets you do a lot of the cool stuff. Like we have, tiling for maybe you want to create like game textures, or isometric for more isometric assets, top down. By default, it's top down and modern at 35% and 40%. Generally, with the strengths, I recommend keeping it around 50%. Between 20% and 50% is a good value. A fun thing that you can do is you can actually set these to negative values, and it's not quite intuitive what that does, but it can lead to some pretty neat styles if you try mixing things around. So we have the game characters style, the game characters, anime specific and kind of retro video game specific, game items, Nasher Kim items, which is actually a sort of collaboration that we did with the pixel artist Nasher Kim, and actually he let us train his style into the generator, and so you can kind of create assets in a similar way that he does, which is really, really cool and an amazing opportunity to be able to work with an artist like him. I was actually a pixel artist myself, and that's where a lot of the knowledge for this AI model comes from, is my own work. So having someone else that enthusiastic about it and willing to work with us it was fantastic. Anyway, super tangent there, but and then we've got the tiling modifier, and that lets you create those kind of game texture things like I was talking about, top down, isometric, front facing for more of I don't know how you want to call it, but an orthographic view. So like flat assets, maybe you've got a character facing directly towards you, or they're standing on flat ground, that kind of thing. Flat shading, that removes a lot of the kind of more detail-oriented pixel art for a simpler style. 1-bit, which is just 2 colors. Modern, which is sort of that Stardew Valley, Starbound, Terraria, that more modern pixel art aesthetic. And then we have some styles from classic video game consoles, like the NES, the SNES, the Game Boy, Neo Geo, all that kind of thing. And I actually have some custom modifiers loaded in here. These were created by other people, and you can actually just any kind of they're called LoRa models. That's LORA, and you can actually go into the tools here, and you can open the LoRa folder, and this is where you can put any of those LoRa models, and they'll be able to influence image generation with those. You can find those in a ton of different places. You just have to search for it. Only the 1.5 architecture for those is supported, so just keep that in mind if you want to do a little bit more advanced things like that. So I'm just going to set this back to the top down here, and we're going to play around with this kind of modern style a bit. So let's generate another image here just to kind of get a baseline. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to change that modern style. And actually what I'm going to do too is go to the settings here, and I'm going to click this use last seed automatically. And that's just going to always keep that seed that I was talking about earlier. That's going to keep that the same. And so if I open this again, I should be able to go here and grab this seed number from the last generation and put it in here. And now we can, use that to compare as we make changes to this image. So I'm going to change out this modern modifier for the front-facing modifier, and that'll give us a little bit of a different style here. So you can see, because of the seed staying the same, these two numbers, they're identical. You can actually see that the basic shape of the image stayed pretty much consistent, but you can also see the difference that it made there with the different style applied. And if we go through and try out a few different of these, maybe the flat shading one, changes the style a bit more, but you can also see that it's a bit more simple. There's less details in it, that kind of thing. If we change it over to something like the Neo Geo style, you're going to see that that's going to be a lot more gritty and have a lot more detail. Just like that, kind of in line with that era of video games on the Neo Geo console. You can also change it to something like isometric and get a different view of it. Kind of put more of these outlines around it, just some background separation. But you can play around with these modifier settings a whole bunch and get a whole bunch of different styles. You can mix them all together in different ways. You can load a bunch at the same time. There's actually a setting here in the menu as well. If you open up the UI settings area, you can change the number of LoRa's that can be applied at once, and that'll let you load more or less, whatever you want. And you can, set them all at different strengths and just play around with how they interact and get a lot of different looks that way. So moving on from that, we've got these processing settings. And the first ones that you'll see here in this top row, we have sampling. So this show preview is basically, it's this. So if you uncheck show preview, it won't send anything to this box, or if this is closed, it won't open it. And it can be a little bit faster with the preview disabled, but it's also just kind of nice to have to see as the image progresses. So that's enabled by default, but you can turn it off if you want. This strong text guidance box, this is a little bit more technical, but strong text guidance is sort of a way that I've developed to keep the model adhering better to prompts than it normally would. It's generally advised to just leave that on. It doesn't really cost you anything. If you have like a lower end computer that maybe won't be able to load it, but keeping it checked won't cause any problems. It'll just display a little error message saying, hey, wasn't able to load strong text guidance model, and it'll let you know that. It doesn't have any kind of speed impact for image generation other than just pretty much when it first loads and when it's computing that strong text guidance, which can be, a couple seconds. Not a huge deal. There's also this, in the full version, there's this add to prompt checkbox. And that's a way of, if you have, maybe you're not quite sure what you want to generate, but you still want to prompt with a lot of details. So you can put something like a cat in here, right? Super generic. It might create anything. If we just leave that unchecked and hit generate here, you'll see that it's a cat. That's all you get. But maybe you want something a little bit more interesting. Maybe you want a scene added to it, but you're not quite sure what. Enabling this add to prompt, or it might also be called enhance prompt, something like that. If you enable that, now when we click generate, it will load this prompt translation model, and it gives us this whole long string here, and I'll just open that up so you can see it. It took that prompt that we gave it, a cat, and turned it into a sleek black cat with emerald eyes, gazes intently at a poodle. Its tail curled around its body, the cat's fur is soft and fluffy, blah, 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 blah. So it turned it into this big, long description. And that can, sometimes it makes weird stuff, but sometimes it can really enhance your image and how it looks. Oh, right, we're generating with the same seed, so it's always going to come out the same here. But if we change the seed here, just empty that out. Now we've got a different description because it's a different seed, and it generates a different image. So this can be helpful, kind of if you're just looking for inspiration or trying out different ways of generating things and you're not sure quite what you want. If you're trying to make something precise, it's generally a good idea to turn it off because that model that's expanding your prompt might not quite understand the details of what you're trying to make. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off that use last seed button just because I want to generate some different things here. Moving on, we've got the rendering settings. We've got this use fast pixel decoder. So the fast pixel decoder is actually what you're seeing create these sort of quick renders. So what's going on behind the scenes is you have the model itself, which is generating these images, but it's making them in something that's called a latent space. And that doesn't quite translate directly into the RGB color that people see and screens display. So we have to use something called a decoder to be able to turn those latent space images into pixel space images, red, green, blue. And by default, this is done with something called a variational autoencoder, which is a big fancy word, and it's a larger model that kind of just renders the images once they're done being created. This can be a little bit slow and it can be processing intensive for larger images. So we also have this fast pixel decoder, which is something that we actually created and trained ourselves. And it's really, really fast. It uses basically no memory, but it's also a little bit less accurate than the larger model. So if you are maybe having trouble with image generations taking a long time, or maybe you're running out of memory, you can turn on this fast pixel decoder, and that should fix a lot of those problems if it's happening towards the end of image generation. We also got this automatically reduce output colors checkbox. And if I just turn this off here and I go in, let's make another cat image, why not? So if I turn that off and make a cat, boom, we've got a cat. You can also see if we zoom in here, it's got a lot of different kind of really close colors in it. You might be able to make that out. And that's not really ideal for pixel art. And so what we do is I'm going to grab this seed here again so we can generate the same image. And if I turn on that automatically reduce output colors button and generate this cat again, it takes all of those different colors and it reduces them down to sort of the core colors that make up the image. So it's just a quick way of getting a really clean output. What you can also do is if you generate with the full range of colors, you can go to Sprite and Palletize and use the automatic palette source. And this does effectively the same thing. It'll just reduce those colors down. You can see it's completely identical in this example. Palletize is a whole other feature, and I'll probably have a video going over that one specifically. But using that automatically reduce image colors setting is just a great way to have cleaner outputs just from the get-go. So now you saw me kind of toggling this back and forth a few times to see some of the different settings, but this is the advanced options checkbox, and this will just expose some more settings. One of those settings, the first one here, is a setting called scale. This is a more technical setting, something that people who use other AI image generators might be familiar with as CFG scale, or classifier free guidance scale. And this is kind of analogous to contrast in the image. It's a bit more technical than that. It has to do with how this prompt and negative influence the image generation. Generally, I advise keeping it around 5. That's the default for a reason. But higher or lower values can create more vibrant images, less vibrant images. They change the way that it kind of understands the relationship between that prompt and the negative that you gave it. Playing around with values, you can find out kind of what works best for you and what you like. Like I said, 5 is pretty much all you need. It's good. So the seed here, you heard me talking about that a little bit, but what this seed is it's in random number generation, there's this idea of a seed, and if you use the same seed, you will get the same random number, because when we create random numbers, it's usually sort of faked. It's not completely random, it's just mostly random. And so using this seed value is a way that you can create the same images from the same settings. It's also a great way of, if you use the same seed over and over again, you can really see how changing different settings affects how the image looks. In this image style settings tab, we have just one row of advanced settings that gets added, and these are some tiling options. I generally don't advise using these currently. They're sort of a legacy feature built into the engine. It's much better to, instead of using these settings, to use the tiling modifier model, just because generally the results are better. These settings mathematically force the image generator to create images that either wrap around from left to right, or from top to bottom, or all around. And mathematically forcing the model like that is not really a good idea. It's I keep talking about it as if it has some sentience, but obviously it doesn't. The math just isn't expecting the values that you get with that, and so it can create some weird results. It can also be super useful if you're creating something like a parallax background, and so it might be good to enable or disable those to get different effects there. The last settings that we've got here is just this show modifiers button that will show and hide the modifiers. If you maybe want a cleaner experience and you don't want to see those, it's just nice to have. The other thing that we have is this input size with sliders. So by default, the width and height values are these sliders. You can move around with your mouse there. Also with the scroll wheel and the arrow keys, I believe. Yep, arrow keys also work. But if you want to just directly input numbers, you can uncheck this input size with sliders box, and now you just have a direct number field that you can just plug values into. There's also this process in background button, and that just means that the terminal that keeps popping up it'll just stay in the background. It won't keep grabbing attention like that anymore. That pretty much covers all of the settings for text to image generation, which is the most simple, the basic, the way that you create images with Retro Diffusion. So I'll just go over some of the differences with image to image now. So what image to image does is, first off, you have to have a layer with content on it. So in this example, we have this this cat, and he's on this layer, this cell here, and we can select it, and then we can go to image, and so now it's taking that image as a sort of starting point for the generation that you want to make. So the other things, the new settings that we get here are this snap to selection and in paint options. So snap to selection will just, if you have maybe a different size set here from the selection that you've made, you can click this snap to selection and it will fit this bounding box. In paint opens up this little menu here, and you can actually draw what you want to regenerate. So maybe I only want to change the cat and I don't want to change the background. So I can just paint in all these pieces of the cat, and now only the cat will be affected when I generate this new image. You can change the brush size here, for larger or smaller brushes. You can obviously clear the selection. And when you have a mask that you want to keep, so maybe, if I mask out the face here, I can click this save button and that will save this this mask that I've made. I'm just going to click cancel because I don't want to do any kind of in-painting right now. The other setting that you get is this strength setting. And at low strengths, it will barely change the image, and at high strengths, it will completely change the image. It's kind of as simple as it gets. So now I'm just going to keep the prompt this cat still and generate from the image. So you can see it kind of, keeps that same shape as the cat we gave it as an input and just creates a new version. So this is a great way of, maybe you've got a color sketch of something and you want to turn it into a full image. So let's just real quickly here I love this example. This is one of my favorite examples to give. 2 brown circles. Maybe some yellow eyes here. And then if we grab this and go to image and ask for an owl, and we'll probably want to set this this strength pretty high here. And now we can just generate an owl from a couple of circles. I'm sure someone will get that reference. Yeah, that's how image-to-image works, and it can be super useful, especially if you want to have a little bit more control over image generation. There are some more advanced ways of controlling image generation using the neural tools and control nets and all that kind of thing. And I'll, like I said, cover those probably in a later video. But for now, that's about it. That's the basic image generation. If there's a feature that you kind of want explored a bit more, or maybe you have some questions about it, definitely leave a comment. Also, it helps a ton if you leave a like on the video. Obviously, getting this shown to more people is super helpful for me because this is a tool that I put a lot of my time into, and it's also really helpful for game developers. There are a ton of game developers and artists using Retro Diffusion, and it really helps, speed up asset creation. So if you know a developer who might be interested in it, definitely share it with them. Might be able to save them a lot of time. So thanks for watching. Let me know kind of what features you want me to explore next, things that you want to see, and I'll come out with some more tutorials here soon.